speaking life into it. Light appeared. Sky and land split from the oceans. Trees and plants grew. Days and nights began, and all kinds of creatures filled the earth. Humans were formed in God's image to continue God's work. Things were really good. But soon, humans decided we want to live our way, not God's. In their struggle for control, selfishness and violence filled the world. So God started over with just Noah and his family. A few generations later, God made this covenant to a man named Abraham. The land around you, as far as you can see, is now yours. Your family will be as many as the stars and will be my blessing to the entire world. Years passed. Then miraculously, in their old age, Abraham and his wife had their only son, Isaac, just as God promised decades earlier. Later, Isaac had twins, Jacob and Esau. Then Jacob had 12 sons. The youngest, Joseph, moved the family to Egypt, saving them from a famine. There, they grew into a large nation, a people called to be different, to remind everyone what it looks like to live in God's ways. Abraham's descendants, now called the people of Israel, were moved to Egypt by Joseph to save them from a famine. There they grew into a large nation. The Egyptians welcomed them at first, but soon this turned into fear and jealousy. The Israelites were forced to be slaves and do hard labor. But God heard their cries of pain. Through a humble leader named Moses and incredible signs and wonders, God led the Israelites in a great exodus back toward their promised land. As the Israelites journeyed through the desert, God guided them with a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. The Israelites complained about being hungry and abandoned. So God sent birds and sweet flaky manna for them to eat, and made fresh water pour from a rock. God even lived in the middle of their camp in a sacred tent called a tabernacle. Along their journey, God gave them special instructions called laws and commands, guiding the Israelites to live differently, to show others how to follow God's ways. But the people complained, "We don't want to live by these rules like slaves again." Living their own ways, the Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years. After decades of complaining and struggling in the desert, a new leader named Joshua charged the Israelites back into their homeland. Miraculously, God stopped the flow of the Jordan River so they could safely cross. God warned, "Drive out everyone who lives in the promised land, or they will corrupt your lives." But the Israelites didn't listen, intermarrying and worshiping the false gods of the people who remained there. Soon, God's protection was removed, and other nations overpowered Israel. In their defeat, they suffered, begging God for help. So God sent judges to lead them in battle, defending the promised land. In victory, the people worshipped God, but soon after, they turned from God and lived their own rebellious ways. This became a pattern from generation to generation. This was a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
One day, King David was walking around the roof of his palace and saw a woman bathing in her home. Her name was Bathsheba, the wife of a soldier named Uriah, who was off fighting in the war. David thought she was beautiful and sent his messengers to get her. They brought her to him, and David and Bathsheba slept with one another. Shortly after, Bathsheba sent word to David that she was pregnant with David's child. To hide what he had done, David quickly devised a plan. He called Uriah back from the war, hoping that he would sleep with Bathsheba, and it would look like he had gotten her pregnant. But when Uriah came home, he slept on a mat outside his house because he didn't want to disrespect his fellow soldiers still at war by living comfortably while he was at home. So David came up with another plan. He sent Uriah back to the battlefield and instructed the commander to put Uriah on the front lines of battle, where he was most likely to be killed. And that's exactly what happened. Shortly after, David married Bathsheba, and she gave birth to their son. But God was unhappy with David and sent Nathan to tell him a story. There were two men, one rich and one poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb who was like a child to him. Now a guest comes to the home of the rich man, but instead of taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal, the rich man steals the poor man's one sheep and kills it. David was furious. "This man must die for what he has done," David said. Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man." David immediately realized how wrong he had been and confessed to Nathan and to God all of the things he had done. Even though God forgave David, there were still terrible consequences because of his actions. David and Bathsheba's infant son became sick and died. Then, years later, their second son, Absalom, did something no one, even David, expected. He gathered an army together to overthrow his father as king. Before the battle began, David gave instructions to his soldiers not to kill Absalom. But during the battle, Absalom was riding a mule under the thick branches of a large oak tree, and his hair got caught in the tree, leaving him hanging as the mule rode away. One of David's commanders, Joab, found Absalom, and despite David's instructions, he and his soldiers drove their spears through Absalom and killed him. Because of this, David was heartbroken, wishing that it had been him who died instead of his son. Even after these tragedies, David continued to worship God. He had not forgotten about God's promise to one day build the temple. So David told his son, Solomon, that he was to start building it. In his final days as king, David led the Israelites in worship of God for all of the ways that God had helped them and provided for them over the years. Then, shortly before his death, David handed over his kingship to Solomon.
Thank you, boys. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here this morning. It's good to see that you didn't get blown away over the last couple of days. My goodness. And it's crazy, isn't it? But it's Indiana. What do we expect? So it's great to see you this morning. I was thinking as we were singing the song, Oh Happy Day. I don't know, sometimes I just get a picture of something. Singing Oh Happy Day, I'm not going to say I came real close, but I thought about, wouldn't it be neat if we had people that would just come across the stage and do their happy thing and just keep going, don't even stop, and just have several just come across the stage, doing their deal, whatever. That'd be fun maybe sometime. So we'll have to break it up sometime and maybe do a dramatic presentation of Oh Happy Day. Wouldn't that be fun? Break it up. So, all right. Well, let's look at what we have here for today. We're in another installment of the story. And the story, finding your story in God's story, and it's installment chapter 12 in your book. This is a very intriguing installment of the story, and it's entitled "The Trials of a King." And so we look at King David today, and more specifically, we look at one of the low points of his life. There was a lot of high points in his life, and we could talk about those, but in the interest of time here this morning, we're going to focus on this low point in his life. But a low point becomes a point of grace. It becomes a point of new beginning and new starts, and that's the kind of God that we serve. Thank God for that, because we need it. But we could, like I said, we could say a lot of good things about David, but let's just hasten on to the text in front of us this morning, and that is, we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 11. And there came a point in David's life where he lets down his guard, and he makes some tragic choices. And he made a very tragic choice when it comes to the story of Bathsheba. This is probably one of the most popular sin stories of the Bible, next to Genesis 3, the Adam and Eve story and the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. This is probably the second most popular sin story in the Bible. And so we're very familiar with this story. Even people who don't read the Bible much know about this story. And about a year before the Bathsheba episode, though, it's going to help us to know that Israel had fought a two-front war. And Joab took half of the army, and he went a certain direction. David took the other half of the army, and he goes another direction. And because they were skilled leaders and military leaders, and because God was watching out for the nation, they were victorious in the battles that they fought. But winter eventually set in. And when winter set in, the fighting stopped. And when spring came, David sent Joab back to the various places where they were doing battle in order to clean up any unfinished battles or skirmishes, whether it's guerrilla warfare or whatever, that might be still lingering in the land. And this is where we find ourselves in the story today. And in a time when David ordinarily would be out fighting with his men, we see in the text that in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out. And that's going to be very telling as we work our way through this story. Now, before I jump into this thing, and it's very intriguing, some of the things that we see in the text, I want to talk to you about a question. And the question I have, I want you to bear in mind as we work our way through the material today, is, can you handle success? Question mark. Can you handle success? Well, some of you are like, well, you know what? What's success? I mean, I would love to have some success to handle. You know, that would be great. But what is success? Well, the fact is that at some point in your life, you're probably going to feel like you've accomplished something, whether it's graduating from high school or college or getting the first job or starting the first business. You know, you're going to have a measure of success, and things are going to line up, and you're going to win the bracket, and you're going to end up in the championship game someday. Okay? And you're going to feel this sense of success. And the question I have for you this morning is, can you handle it? Most of us handle failure, and we learn how to do that. It takes some time, and it's not easy, but we can learn how to handle failure. But the question is, can we handle success? Do we know how to handle it if God does bring blessing? If He does prosper us maybe in different ways, or He actually blesses what we do, and we see rewards for that. Can we handle it? I was reading some on this week, and in the world of leadership, there's what's known as the Bathsheba principle, or Bathsheba syndrome. You'll understand that analogy in just a second when we work our way through this installment of the story. But there are 4 potential byproducts of success that leadership people will tell you about. The first one is personal and organizational success allows leaders to become complacent and lose focus. Personal and organizational success allows leaders to become complacent and lose focus. I want you to bear that in mind. You're going to see it in David's story. In fact, in the time when kings went off to war in the springtime of the year, David stayed at home this time. He had accomplished some things. He was growing a little complacent. He has lost a bit of his focus, and it begins to play out on a large scale in his life. Privately at first and personally, but then it plays out on a much larger scale. So we see this, that one of the byproducts of success is that personal and organizational success allows leaders to become complacent and lose focus. There's 4 of these. Secondly, success often leads to privileged access to information, people, or objects. We think we're entitled to know things, to do things, to control things, and this plays out in the life of those who feel like they've been successful. You're going to see in the David story, he's going to come across with this attitude, if I want her, I can have her. If I want her, I can have her. Because I'm the boss. You see? And as a successful leader, you got to watch out for that. And leadership people will tell you, when you start thinking that way, you're in trouble. You're right on the edge of a major catastrophe in your leadership. The third byproduct of success here is success often leads to unrestrained control of organizational resources. When we look at the David narrative here, David Bathsheba story in 2 Samuel 11, you're going to see that the writer uses the word sent, S-E-N-T. He uses the word sent several times in the story. Why does he do that? David's doing a lot of sending. He's a lot of controlling of circumstances. He's feeling entitled. He's going to do a lot of sending. He's going to command how this thing's going to go because he's the boss, right? You're going to see that word sent a lot. And I'll make a little more of that as we get there. And the fourth byproduct of potential success, 4 potential byproducts of success. Success can inflate a leader's belief in his or her personal ability to manipulate or control outcomes. David even goes as far as to come up with 3 plans to cover this personal and private mistake that plays out on a public scale nevertheless. He tries to manipulate things. He tries once, plan A fails. He tries again, plan B fails. He tries again, plan C, and that was successful, but with dramatic, climactic consequences. And so I want you to bear those 4 byproducts of success in mind. And I want you to know that I'm answering the question, can you handle success? Or I'm helping you answer that question for yourself. Can I handle success if God should allow me to have a measure of success in my life? We look on slide number 4, if you would please. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war. Now, why do we do war in springtime? Well, there's better weather in springtime. You don't have as much snow. I went out today to open my door to come to church, and my door was frozen shut on my van. And that just always tries my sanctification. When I try to get in my van and go to church, my doors are frozen shut. Usually it freezes shut in the dead of winter. This is supposed to be spring, right? And so in the spring, it's a little warmer. Your doors don't freeze as much. The roads are a little better. The troops, they can find fodder in the fields for feeding their war horses. It's easier to find food for the troops themselves. So in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, it's like all the rival nations have an agreement. You know what, boys? We can do this thing, but let's wait for warmer weather to get our differences settled. Okay, so there's kind of a common agreement in the Middle East. Let's fight in warmer weather when it's all easier for everybody. That's kind of the way they looked at things. Well, David sent, say it with me, church, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They're all gone. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. Now, if we look on slide number 14, slide 14 for me, you're going to see the geography of what's playing out here. Jerusalem, of course, is where the royal palace is, and you're going to find about 40 miles to the northeast a little town in Rabbah, actually a significant town in Rabbah in the region of Ammon or Ammon. There is this siege taking place, and they evidently this is a siege because the text says there was the city of Rabbah was besieged, so it could take months, it could take even years if you're behind fortified walls. If you have a water supply, you're good to go for a long period of time. You can withstand it. And perhaps this was something that factored into King David's thoughts. How long am I going to be there? And do I really want to be there that many weeks or months or however long this is going to take? And so he decides he's going to remain in Jerusalem, and that's exactly what the text says. Why did he remain? Well, we do a little research. He's about 50 years of age at this time. He has experienced success. He has an established a model of what a king should be. He's seeking God's will. He's valuing and celebrating God's presence among His people. A simple cursory review of his life indicates that he's responding humbly to God's gracious promises. He's trusting in God for security. He's promoting justice. He's seeking to mirror God's faithful character in his relationships with others. Plus, at 50 years of age, I'm like 2 years from that, okay, sleeping on the ground, eating army grub, and being smelly for days on end has lost its appeal about 20 years ago. All right? And he has been king for 20 years. His cabinet is strong. He's expanded Israel's boundaries within the promised land. He's loved by the people. He's respected by the soldiers. I mean, after all, he takes Goliath out for the nation of Israel. And after all, this siege could last for umpteen days or weeks. I think I'll set this one out. And that's what he does. One evening, verse 2, David got up from his bed. Now, even though it's still daylight, he's trying to get a power nap in. And when you're 50 years of age, those power naps come in handy from time to time. But it wasn't working, and he's restless. And I believe it was probably because it was so hot outside. And so he wanted to get some relief from the stuffy palace. Slide number 17, if you would. Slide 17. He wanted to get some relief from the stuffy palace, and so this would be a kind of a rendition of what he would be looking at. And you can see the palace located there at the top of your screen. And so he decides he's going to go up on the roof of the palace. And since houses were not air-conditioned in these days, building space was, of course, limited within a city. You had the palace precincts, and then you've got the houses and things around. And perhaps it was much more crowded than that particular rendition renders it. It was very crowded and congested in the city. But you can see that there's building space within the limited city confines were limited, and so roofs were used as an added living space. It was an additional room, if you please, a place where you could maybe go up and cool off, like David was trying to do here in the evening time when the sun was getting ready to set. You could go up and do your devotions up there, or enjoy your favorite book, or maybe you would just go up and cowboy sleep, in the wide open spaces, and you can see the stars, and that's what you were going to do. And some people use it that way. During the day, you could dry fruit and flax in the daytime hours. The roof was just a multi-purpose place you could go and hang out. It wasn't that big. And so David, when he's on the roof, is going back and forth. Again, it's not that big. And so he's going back and forth, and you can see he's looking out over the city. It's kind of a high point of the city. And it was kind of entertainment in the Middle Eastern world. You can kind of people watch on top of the roof, and you can kind of peek into courtyards and other neighborhoods, and you can kind of see what people were into. And so it was a kind of a kind of entertainment, 900 BC entertainment for King David. And so he was walking around on the roof of the palace, and then the text narrator says, from the roof. He says it again. He lets us know David's feeling pretty tall up there. From the roof. He's on the roof, and now he's from the roof, he says. He's at the pinnacle of his career. 50 years old, conquered the nations that were assaulting his people. A family that's growing, wealth, expanded boundaries. Oh, life is good. Let's sip some lemonade and have a pina colada on me, because it's time to celebrate. And then something catches his eye. He saw a woman bathing. Slide number 18, if you would. Could she see David? Did she know that she was visible? Was she sending him a message of availability? We're not told. The text says the woman was very beautiful. Slide number 4. Well, how does he know she's beautiful? Well, The glance becomes the gaze. That's how he knows. It's not, oh, there's someone bathing. It's, oh, there's someone bathing. And all of a sudden, all the other courtyard entertainments of the evening lose their glamour and appeal. And he zeroes in, bam, right there. And he takes everything in. She was so attractive, the text says, that the woman was very beautiful. And if her bath was typical of the time, she had a small basin or tub of water, slide number 19 if you would. A small basin or tub of water, a sponge and a pitcher for rinsing in the family courtyard. And of course on a stuffy, hot day and evening, a bath would feel great, especially if you haven't had one for a few days. Commentators, both male and female, have scolded Bathsheba for her bathing ritual. One said, had she been a careful, modest woman, surely she would have looked around the easily seen adjacent roofs. David may be a voyeur, says one, but Bathsheba is an exhibitionist. Well, in all fairness, I think in the discussion, these commentators and their graduate degrees notwithstanding, I don't think we really have enough knowledge here to know that that was precisely the case. Whether it's innocent bather versus a baiting her neighbor approach, we're not told this. But it was a time when men went off to war, when kings went off to war. And if kings and men went off to war, wouldn't most of them be gone out of the city anyway? What is David doing still here? You see. Everybody else is off fighting the battle. Somebody stayed home. Bathsheba may be counted on that when she went out to have her bath that evening. Verse 3 says, and David, say it with me, church, sent. David sent. He's feeling pretty powerful, isn't he? Up on the rooftop, making the calls, calling the shots. He sent, slide number 4, someone to find out about her. He's close enough to see her shape, to see that she's beautiful, but he's far enough away that he doesn't know precisely who she is. And so, as I've said, the houses are jammed together, and so it would sometimes be difficult to know who lived where. And so the man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. They would have known each other. Uriah was a leading soldier and loyal warrior, even though he's not of Israelite descent. And because of this, some feel that Bathsheba was not an Israelite either. And so we see here, just by implication, that non-Israelites could find a refuge with the Lord's people if they were willing. And they too could be carriers of the great story and be a blessing to the world. And so we see this God writing other people into the story. So don't count out the fact that God works in ways beyond just the nation of Israel. But He's chosen the nation of Israel to be a very special carrier of a very special story. And we've been looking at in this series. But what we do know, that there's enough information here on the part of the servant's report to let David know, David, my 50-year-old king, royal king and prince, this woman is off limits. The servant laces his fact-finding mission with subtle warnings. Here's her name. She's the daughter of someone you know. She's the granddaughter of your most trusted counselor. We learned this in other passages. And the wife of someone you trust. In so many words, this is not good, David. If you're thinking of doing what I think you're thinking of doing, you're going to make a mistake. It's the lowly servant who is wiser than his king here. David, if you go down this path, buddy, it's trouble. She's a woman with relationships. And all David could see was a body. Not a daughter, not a granddaughter, Not a wife, not a neighbor. A body is all that she was. Then David, say it with me, church, David sent messengers, plural, to get her. I don't think she could have resisted if she wanted to. Messengers, plural. David knew what it would take. He wasn't in the mood for excuses. He had an agenda. And once again, he sends on the rooftop. 50 years of age. A little bit of success in his life. Got the world by a string. The text says, she came to him. And he slept with her. It's an idiomatic Hebrew expression that still translates in the modern nomenclature of our time. It simply means he engaged in sexual relationship with her. And she with him. If she may have resisted, we're not told that she did. And perhaps there was something in her that wanted to honor her king. And perhaps she's lonely from not seeing her husband for many weeks, perhaps. Maybe David is lonely, feeling entitled. We're not exactly told. But here they are in the springtime of the year. With a full moon, perhaps. Bright stars. David's older, it's true. But he's still handsome. He's still brilliant musically. He's a mighty warrior. He's a capable ruler. He's a wealthy man. He's able to grant favors. He can bestow riches. He can provide. If my husband doesn't make it home from the battle, this is a guy that could take care of me. He looks at you with longing. And something in her wanted to give herself to him, perhaps. But if that were the circumstances, would you have been the one that would have followed him to the rooftop? Especially if you weren't loved by your husband. Just let me interject here. If you've ever done this, an extramarital deal, I want you to know you're loved. And God's grace is great. And I know that I probably speak to some who have decided to travel this path. And I'm not going to treat you any different. I've learned to not do that a long time ago, where we treat people based on what they've done or haven't done. When I see you, I want you to know, I see in Jesus, in Christ right here. In Christ. You're in Him. And I love you. And I'm glad to know you. I'm glad you're part of our church family. No matter what you've been through, what decisions you've made, you're in Jesus. And you're covered in His righteousness. Praise God. Your receipt's in Him. And, but I just want to suggest to you that for a man who has a dozen wives that could have easily cooled his hormonal jets, yet he chooses the untouchable, that man is after something more than just a sexual liaison. It's about self-worth. It's about power. It's about control. It's about an utter disregard for God's calling in his life. He has lost his focus, just like I began here today. One of those 4 byproducts of success. He's lost his focus. He's lost his mission. God seems so far away. The ark is in somebody else's keeping. And God's presence doesn't feel as close as it once felt in Jerusalem. And David is at age 50 feeling entitled. Maybe there's discontent in his life. And maybe he thought an affair would fix it. Just like you and I think that we try to figure things out. And maybe it's a trauma of lost youth. Maybe it's the trauma of a declining masculinity. Maybe it's the trauma of the inability of wielding the sword like I once did. And maybe he's got these thoughts rolling around in our head. Maybe do I still have what it takes? Am I still the man? Am I still the woman? Am I still appealing? Am I still able to conquer? These are the questions that many times we have when we choose to walk down these paths. Well, David was in the same situation. And the text says, parenthetically, now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. After waiting for 7 days, according to Leviticus, this tells us that Bathsheba had just had her monthly cycle, so she's definitely not pregnant already. There's no way what's going to happen in the story could have happened with her husband, in other words. She's bathed. She's 7 days after her monthly period, as required by Mosaic rule. As you know, it's also the most fertile time of the month. And this parenthetical statement plays big in the text, and especially the next verse. The text says, then she went back home, and what's really unique is that there's not one recorded word from her in the text. She's a voiceless individual. Slide 5, the text says, the woman conceived, and we saw this coming, didn't we? The woman conceived. Does she have a name? The woman conceived. Is she more than just a body? The woman conceived. Does she have relationships? Does she have a mother and a father, a brother, a sister? People that love and care for her? The woman conceived. Just a woman. Just a body. It's so not love. It's so not love. The woman conceived and sent word to David. Now she does a little sending. Sent word to David saying, and her first words in the narrative, I am pregnant. We saw this coming. If you've ever had to set your parents down and say this, or you share this with your family, you know how vulnerable Bathsheba felt. And by the way, if this ever happens in your family, I would hope that you would please convey love and belonging, because people need your support and they need your love. They don't need your temper tantrums and all the things you want to do to try to make people feel worse for what they've maybe done. They need your love. And make sure you convey that in times like this. Well, Bathsheba was feeling vulnerable, and so she shares with David what's happened. And so David sent, say it with me, church, sent, still in control, isn't he? He's going to work this out. He's going to fix this. So David, verse 6, sent this word to Joab, 40 miles away. Send me Uriah the Hittite. A 5-word message from the messenger. And he sends for Uriah like he sent for Bathsheba. Is somebody feeling powerful? Is somebody feeling entitled? I think so. You know, when David was a fugitive, when he was in the wilderness being hunted down by Saul, a group of friends voluntarily came around him. And they were called his mighty men, and they risked their lives to save David's life. And one of them, guess who it was? Was Uriah the Hittite. This is the man to whom David owes his life. And Joab sent him to David. And so David calls Uriah back from the front lines, ostensibly to get a report on how the battle's going, assuming that he would stay overnight and sleep with his wife, and later on assume the child was his. And in a pre-DNA world, it was a great plan. On the rooftop, in the evening tide, at 50 years of age, the world by a string. It was a great plan. Verse 7. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. King David makes small talk with him, and we see that his answers to David's questions are not included in the text. And so David doesn't really care what he's hearing. He's not really paying particular attention to what he's saying. He's just there making small talk. And so verse 8, then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. In the shy world of the Old Testament writer, It's his way of saying, wash your body and enjoy your wife sexually. And by the way, this one is on me, Uriah. There are places in the Old Testament where the euphemistic use of feet in the sense of genitals occurs. It's guy talk. I'll let you figure it out. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him, probably food and wine. Verse 9, but Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. What a soldier. He sleeps with soldiers while David sleeps with his wife. What a contrast. Uriah couldn't disengage while his fellow warriors were dying, so plan A is going to fail. Verse 10, David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Slide number 6, verse 11. Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. I can't enjoy this while I know their men are dying for this cause that I'm engaged in. And I say, what a dedicated soldier. Verse 12. Then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back. I will send you back. Is somebody feeling entitled? Is he still feeling like he can call the shots, even to cover up a major boo-boo in his life? Right? He's still feeling that way. I will send you back. And so Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Here's plan B. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. Every time Uriah's mug was near empty, David had it refilled to the brim. And most people do crazy things with alcohol in their system, but not Uriah. In the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. Again, Uriah was more noble drunk than his king was sober. What a guy. Verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. Plan C. Okay, 3 plans. David's getting desperate. He's afraid this thing is going to blow wide open and it's going to tarnish the career that he's established for himself. And so he comes up with this letter, and he writes a letter, and basically it's Uriah's death warrant, and he's going to have this man to carry his own orders to execute him. Again, it's one of David's low points. In it, he wrote, verse 15, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. It's David at his worst. And I just want to interject right here that this is what you and I are capable of. The seeds of this kind of thing live in every human heart. And even the best people. I've pastored for a lot of years. Even church people have the seeds of this kind of thing that is in the human heart. And if it gets watered, if it gets fertilized, if you put it in the right circumstances, it grows. And people do crazy things. Rationalizations like you wouldn't believe. Defense mechanisms like you would not believe. Self-deceptions like you would not believe. And it stirs within. And it sets everything up for on a rooftop, in the evening, in the late of the day. And something catches your eye. And it's now you're going to choose whether or not you're going to act or not. And they go for it. It says, if David the beloved, the man close to God's heart. This passage says, one of the most godly and great figures in the history of the world. If he is capable of this, do you think you're not? Do you think I'm not? Here's how this works. People in power, people at the top, people in places of leadership, they sacrifice a great deal. In fact, sometimes they sacrifice a whole lot. They give of themselves. They have no lives of their own. They get an enormous amount of opposition sometimes. There's a lot of criticism to go through. If you've led anything, whether it's a church or a party, a governmental party or a business or a family or coach a team, there's a lot of criticism for leaders sometimes. And in fact, sometimes it's not even rightly motivated. It's wrong and false and all kinds of things associated with that. Well, leaders go through this. And because the leader suffers and because the person gives so much and because the person sacrifices so much, deep inside this person, there's a seed of self-pity. There's a seed of self-righteousness. Nobody knows what I have to put up with. Nobody knows the sacrifices I've made for the public. Nobody understands. And when the opportunity for the bribe comes, when the opportunity for embezzlement shows up, when the opportunity for the affair arises, the person in power says, I deserve this. All the sacrifices I've made, what I've been through, I deserve this. Nobody understands what I'm going through. I've given so much. And then along comes the temptation. And you go down on the roof. Along comes the bribe, the whatever. Suddenly the seed sprouts. And your life is never the same. You know, sometimes I preach messages that are really the purpose is to encourage and edify. Other times I preach messages, as a good shepherd should, that are meant to caution and warn. And really that's where this is this morning. There's times when we need to caution the troops and warn the group. Be careful. Slide number 7, verse 16. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. Verses 19 and 20 and 21 kind of tell you how the battle goes. Slide number 8, verse 22, we'll pick it up there. The messenger set out, and when he arrived, the messenger from Joab, to give David the message, his plan C had actually worked. Everything Joab had sent to him to say. The messenger said to David, verse 23, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Did you see that phrase? Some of the king's men died. Collateral damage. Men died just so Uriah could be killed. You see how low this goes? Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. Basically what happened is that Uriah's troops were sent on a mission to attempt a breach of the walls, being besieged at Rabbah. And the Israelite casualties occurred when Uriah's division was met by a foray of Ammonites coming out of the city. They engaged the troops, and when they engaged the troops, they were exposed to the javelin throwers and the arrows that were shot on top of the walls, and the men came under fire, and Uriah, as well as so many other men, lost their lives. You just have no idea the damage that's going to be done when we begin to concoct and make our plans to cover our life and our paths and our mistakes. Well, there's a much better way to deal with it. And we're going to get there. You just hang with me here. Psalm 51 is kind of like the conclusion of all of this. Verse 26, slide 9. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. This would have included weeping, wailing, modifying your diet, even modifying what you wore to show grief. Verse 27, after the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife. And everybody thought, how nice of David to take care of that Uriah's widow. What a great king. And bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. All of it. Adultery, a stolen wife, a drinking party, murdered soldiers, an illegitimate baby. David thought he had the whole thing covered. And even though only a few servants could do the math, and nobody, though, after doing the math, no matter how many times they counted from Uriah's death forward, it never equaled 9 months. But most importantly, God saw it. And eventually people would know a dead husband, a hasty marriage, a child born. What Goliath and the Ammonites could not do, David did to himself. He became his own worst enemy. Now, how does it get resolved? It's a sad story. We could dwell on this for a while. But it takes a prophet, a man of God, to recover a sense of God's presence for David. And I'll just summarize what 2 Samuel chapter 12 includes. David, of course, in those days you didn't have an executive branch and a judicial branch and those things. David was everything. He was all of those things as the king. And so Nathan the prophet comes in one day. It's about a year after this has transpired. And he says, Your Honor, King David, I have a case I would like to consult with you about. David sat and he listened to this case as he often did. And by the way, if you want to impact a former shepherd turned king, you talk sheep. And that's what he does. David, can I tell you a story? King David said, shoot. He tells him a story. He says there's a rich guy with a lot of sheep, a lot of herds. He gets an unexpected traveler into his home. It was imperative to take care of those who would happen into your home and wander in the Middle East, and it was a social obligation. And so he has all of these herds and sheep, and there's a guy down the road that has a little sheep named Fluffy. And Fluffy was his pet, this little poor guy's pet. And in fact, when they would do lunch together, the man would sometimes take his little goblet or whatever, and he would put it down and let Fluffy have a drink right out of his goblet. That's just how close he was to his little pet lamb, little female lamb. And sometimes Fluffy would even curl up and sleep with this guy. Well, when the rich guy gets this unexpected guest, he somehow manages to steal the poor guy's one little sheep, slaughters him, and feeds him to his guest. King David, what do you think this guy deserves? What should be done with this man? And David, you could see him begin to get he begins to get upset. Well, he says, well, first of all, he's going to pay him back 4 times, and that was the Mosaic rule for restitution. You got to pay back 4-fold. And not only that, but there's other things that David says in 2 Samuel 12. In fact, it says that David burned with anger against the man, and he said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, that's a remarkable oath, the man who did this deserves to die. It's capital punishment time for this guy who swiped the poor man's ewe lamb and served it as a meal to an unexpected guest at a wealthy man's table. And if you think about it, and I love pets and I love animals, but that's a bit excessive. Capital punishment? Where's David going with this? And you see, David is over the top. Why? Because if you're guilty, it makes you unusually upright in all kinds of other areas of your life. David's compensatory zeal to be a champion of justice is provoked. In other words, because he knows in his own conscience he's done something incredibly wrong. He wants to be the champion of something, the champion of justice. And so he flares with anger and capital punishment. David's own guilt is starting to grab him. And that's why he's so furious. David says, who is this man who has done this in my kingdom? Doesn't he know I run a just kingdom? Who is this man? Nathan the prophet looks at him. You're the man. 1 year later, after this transpired in 2 Samuel 11. You had wives, you had a kingdom, you had prestige, you had military accomplishment. David, you are like that rich man. All Uriah had was Bathsheba. And perhaps he really did love her. She was his little ewe lamb. I have a brother-in-law, and he's got a little, I think it's two-year-old girl, and she'll proudly say, "Daddy says I'm his little doe. Daddy say I'm his little doe." Okay. Uriah had a little ewe lamb, his little doe, and David took her. He doted over that woman and loved that woman. And were it not for war and loyalty, he would have been with his wife. But David took her. Can you handle success? You know, there's a number of things that we do to try to answer the question if we still have what it takes, if we're still valuable. And when we look at this matter of adultery in particular, and there's many other things that could be the topic here, but the topic of adultery is the obvious one that we need to look a little more closely at here this morning. What you're going to find is that the adulterer isn't just about an affair. He or she is attracted to the game. The adventure that is sparked by a secret rendezvous, it gives a rush. It's relational high voltage, and it's deadly. And the adrenaline rush of rendezvousing undetected with a lover in secret places, it's addicting. And one author tells about a gal named Shelley. She was a married Christian, and she was involved in her church. But she met Dan at church, and innocent thoughts turned into intimate longings. And here's her journal entries. May 4th, Dan is so considerate. Yesterday, as I was walking out of church, he held the door open for me and told me how nice I looked. And I can't remember the last time that Richard told me I looked pretty, and that's her husband. That's May 4th. May 15th, her entry reads, Richard and I hired Dan to remodel the basement. I find myself looking forward to his visits. May 20th. Dan is having problems with his daughter. I offer some advice, and he was so grateful. He gave me a hug, and it felt so good to be appreciated. I often replay that moment in my mind. June 1st. Dan and I are going to lunch today to finalize details on the basement. I've tried on 10 different outfits, extra perfume, and I keep telling myself it's no big deal. June 2nd. Yesterday during lunch, the cheesecake took me by surprise. Offering him a bite of mine seemed harmless, but the moment he tasted it, our eyes locked and zap. Bottom. All right. June 4th. She says, I'm jittery and jumpy. Each time the phone rings, I hope it's Dan. When a car drives by, I look out to see if it's he. I'm filled with longing, and it's not for my husband. Help me, God. Now, Shelley was in tears about all of this, and fortunately she has some trusted friends. She has some Nathans in her life to help her get perspective on it, and she was able to avoid a catastrophic situation in her life. And sometimes we need Nathans. And that's what the local church is about sometimes. People who will help recover for you the sense of God and His presence before you do something crazy. You know, in your YouVersion app tools, there's another application point here that you'll find. And I share this with you because I want you to recognize, again, this message. Of course, messages take on different tones and atmospheres, and I understand that. And today, I want you to bear in mind that I feel compelled to share this with you simply because I want to caution. I want to I want to help you avoid heartache in your life. And the way, if we look in the anatomy of affairs, the way they work, it goes something like this. First, you don't have the intimacy that you would like to have in your marriage. Number one. Your marriage is more like a gardener married to a maid. There's no lingering conversations. There's no intimacy. There's no time to spend with each other. You just kind of exist alongside each other. You share a house. You get mail at the same place. But that's just about it. Distance is the one word that describes your relationship. There's disillusionment. Things like, my marriage is boring, frustrating, and lonely. It's kind of catatonic. I feel like I'm dying in this relationship. It's Eden all over again. Adam and Eve began to hide from God. They hide from one another. And we can do that too. And that's that first crucial step in the anatomy of an affair. And so I'm thinking, I'm not a smart guy, but I'm thinking, well, I better make sure that there's lingering conversations in my relationship. So you can kind of invert these. And even though they're formed as a caution and as the anatomy of affair, they're also exhortations. Are you having those lingering conversations with your wife, with your husband? Are you getting that couch time where you just get to share and connect with each other? Well, second, you meet somebody that catches your eye. You have a conversation and there was a spark. Maybe you work together. Maybe you'll shoot an email. Hey, can we do lunch? Well, sure, I guess. A few weeks later, they're both working late on a project. They do dinner and conversation is great. And in so many ways, a man or woman will look at you and tell you with admiring eyes that you're the best thing that's come down the pike in a long, long time. And that will build a neat social, spiritual, relational context. And by the way, if it's in a church context, it's all the better. Because it all feels so right. Right? It feels so romantic. Third, the two people begin to enjoy the relationship. And the other person begins to emotionally meet all the needs that a spouse is not meeting. They love their time together. And the time passes so quickly. Fourth, the relationship is so thrilling that they will begin to strategize as to how they can spend more time together. Think of the word escape. They escape from the ordinariness of life and they plug into this relational high voltage. And they figure out how they can be together more and more. Guys, I've pastored for 20 plus years. I've seen everything you can see. And it is amazing how we can rationalize every bit of this in the name of God and Jesus. Fifth, at some point, it is also exhilarating that a proposition from one of the two will be expressed. Here's how this goes. I just love talking to you. It's a volley onto the other person's court to see if it will be returned. Here's the common reply. Well, I really enjoy talking to you too. And now it gets closer now. I wish I could talk to my family, even my wife, like I can talk to you. Well, now that you say that, I wish I could talk to my husband like I talk to you. You know what? Fantasy Island has been built. It's only a matter of time. I've told a few people in my life, if I ever start to go down this path, and I think my 2x4 is actually still back there. Will you take this 2x4 and hit me upside the head with it? Is it still there? My 2x4 is still there? Yeah. It is. Let me have that 2x4. I'm not going to dramatize this too much now. I told him, I said, if you ever see me going down this path, because I've seen too much to do this, take this thing and hit me upside the head with it until I get my senses, until I understand. Joey, get off the rooftop. Joey, think about relationships. Think about a wife who's loved me and cared for me, and kids who look up to me, and you who listen to me preach week after week after week. Think about it. Don't throw it away. Don't throw it away. It's bigger and greater than your little fancies. Life is bigger than that. Life purpose is greater than that. You have got to get a grip. Okay? Just don't let me do something stupid, God. And if I ever start going down this path, if you would just give me a few seconds warning so I can brace myself, I would appreciate it. I would appreciate it. And try to stay away from the facial features. Back of the head would be much better. Hit me upside the head with it. Because I've watched those wives those eyes tear up, and they're just heartbroken. And I've seen those husbands cry like little babies in my office, with hard to get their composure because of stuff like this. And if you find yourself, some messages take on an encouragement tone, some messages take on a caution warning tone. That's where we're at here this morning. If you find yourself in this type of situation, use whatever means necessary to get out while you can. Get off your rooftop. Come on down from there. Stop walking around up there. If you go through the door of desire, and you'll find that you'll drag the Lord's name through the mud. You will inflict untold hurt on your key relationships. Again, I underscore that. You will lose the respect of your closest friends. You will destroy your example and credibility. You will lose self-respect. You might even hinder future intimacy with others. Oh, I plead with you to come off your rooftop this morning. After Bathsheba, there's fallout personally and professionally in David's life. The consequences in his personal life include the baby died, yet later Solomon is actually born, and it's amazing how God uses the lineage even of Bathsheba to produce the Messiah. So you're not beyond the grace of God this morning. If you've made the mistake, I want you to feel the love of the Savior and the love of your pastor this morning. But just know that David's daughter was raped after this episode by a brother. Absalom rebels from David. These are the personal consequences. There's professional fallout and consequences because David flees in exile while Absalom rebels and takes the throne. Absalom dies, and David's other son provokes the next major rebellion. And within all of this turmoil, David bears the consequences with dignity, and David's relationship with the God of grace is restored, but he kind of limps home after this. He limps home. God would love it if we could all be like Uriah, the loyal soldier who selflessly served his king. God would love it if we could be like Nathan, to come along to encourage, even confront others who may be on this path. God would love it. But He loves it when we're like David, not so much in the things that he did here, but when we're like David in that he finds a place a year later, due to the help of a prophet, he comes to a place in his life where he draws close to God again, and the songless songwriter was able to sing again. And he graciously accepted the consequences of this major mistake in his life, and yet somehow he finds in God a refuge. He finds in God a new beginning. He finds in God a cleansing that he could not otherwise find. The king took a major cover-up that he tried to cover for 3 times, was finally successful in his 3rd attempt. He takes a major cover-up in his life. Listen to me now, don't miss this. He takes a major cover-up of his life and he turns it into a public document, one that becomes enshrined on everybody's lips. They were joking about the king. They were mad at the king. They were gossiping about the king. That's all they could say about the king. And the king takes this this awful, tremendously dreadful thing that has happened in his life personally, in his life professionally, in his life publicly. He takes it and he turns it into Psalm 51. He created something pretty messy. Yes, he did. But he never stopped seeking God's presence in all of it. He was so God-aware and God-responsive. And when he lost that, it seemed that God used people like Nathan to help him recover the sense of God's presence. Like I said, it was about a year later that Psalm 51 was written, a short time after the confrontation with Nathan the prophet. And we're going to read this psalm in your hearing this morning because it's a fitting way to bring conclusion, because I think it maybe is a psalm some of you need to walk through with me. And, well, you know what? It's not a some of you, it's an all of us need to walk through this psalm. Because one degree or another, we've concocted our plans, we've made our mistakes, we've made our decisions, we got on our rooftops, and boy, were we on our rooftop. And we did some crazy things. And now I'm talking you off the rooftop into the place of repentance. And even though there's intense guilt, maybe in your life, just as David had intense guilt. And by the way, when you read through this psalm, it's not in a nice, neat order. This guy is off balance. He's trying to regain a sense of spiritual balance in his life because he's lost it. And so it comes at you from different angles. It's not this really neat, clean poem. It's a cluttered, adjoining thoughts together, kind of thrown together and poured out of a heart that's broken. Slide number 10, we read Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. David violated the 7th commandment, adultery. He violated the 10th commandment, covering another man's wife. He violates the 6th commandment, murder. He violates the 8th commandment, theft. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness in the womb. You taught me wisdom in the secret place. Cleanse me with hyssop and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. You see, David wasn't just relaxing and taking life easy after this episode. He wasn't just sipping lemonade on his rooftop patio. No, during the aftermath of adultery, you can count on it, he had sleepless nights. He could see his sin written across the ceiling of his room. He tossed and turned in his bed. He saw it written across the walls. He saw it on the plate where he tried to choke down his meals. He saw it on the faces of his counselors. He was a miserable husband, an irritable father, a poor leader, a songless composer.
She tied you to
He couldn't escape the truth. Sin does this to us. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all of my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. When he says, restore to me the joy of my salvation, of course we think, oh, he lost the joy of his salvation because he had sinned and he made a mistake. Yes, but he also we can't overlook the fact that he sinned because the lost He has lost the joy of his salvation, but he has lost the story. We only ever sin because we've lost the joy of our salvation. He says, I forgot your unfailing love. I wasn't ravished with it. I wasn't ravished with the story anymore. It wasn't the joy of my heart. It wasn't my inner parts. It wasn't the thing that ravished me. That's the reason I sinned. And before I ever sinned against Uriah and Bathsheba, it was you, God. I forgot you. I stopped being excited by you. I stopped enjoying you and your story. I lost the joy of salvation because I'd sinned, yes, but I also sinned because I lost the joy of salvation before I ever strayed. I got bored with God. Then I will teach transgressors your ways so that sinners will turn back to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God. You who are God, my Savior, my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. May it please you to prosper Zion, to build up the walls of Jerusalem yet again. Then you will delight in the sacrifices of the righteous, and burnt offerings offered whole. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. You know, Shannon, I don't know where some of you need to go with this today, but I'm reminded of Shannon Etheridge, who shares a great illustration of Psalm 51 type of repentance. She shares a story about Kathy, and we'll close with this. Kathy's husband gave her the lavish gift of unconditional love. And his mercy inspired her to turn from adulterous relationships to pursue a more lifestyle consecrated to God for the sake of her marriage. And she wrote an email about what her husband did to help her recover for her the sense of the presence of God. She says, after engaging in multiple affairs, I knew I would never experience genuine intimacy with my husband until after I confessed to him. And even though I knew my adultery gave Brad every right to divorce me, I couldn't live a double life any longer. And 2 months after my last affair, I was overcome with guilt, she says, and a sense that I was unforgivable. And as we drove down the road, I was wailing with grief over my own sin. Brad pulled over and just held me for a long time. This is her husband. Just held her for a long time. And when we returned home, he called me into our bathroom, and understand there's a married couple here. And he offered to perform a cleansing ceremony for me to help relieve me of my guilt. He lit a candle. He filled the tub with warm water, and he gently removed my clothes from my trembling body. And he ushered me into the tub, and he gently washed me, and he poured water over my head and made me feel for the first time that I had truly been cleansed and forgiven. And although we are having to work on restoring trust, Brad's unconditional love is a lifeline that keeps me striving to truly be the person I really want to be. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for this day. And thank you for your great grace. And thank you for the transparency of the life of David. And I understand there's a lot of information here that we've shared here this morning, but perhaps one of the greatest questions is not just can I handle success, but do I have grace enough to come home to the Father heart of God when I've mishandled success? And I just ask and pray you would give us all that heart. And you would help us all to have recovered for us the presence of God. And so you help us if we've become complacent and we've lost focus. You help us if we think that now we have privileged access to people or information that we really don't have access to. You help us now if we're unrestrained as we try to send everybody and make them do our bidding. And you help us here this morning not to cave in to this directed belief that in our own personal ability we can manipulate and control outcomes. God, we cannot do that. It will cave in on us. And so today, those who need to feel your cleansing grace, would you help husbands to be ministers of that grace? And those who need to be cleansed of some great offense, would you help wives to affirm and to be agents of this cleansing? And those who think that this is the way to do life and relationships, because it's all they see on the news, on media, and in the movies. Those who are yet maybe to go down this path and are wondering whether or not maybe they should or shouldn't, I just pray that this would be a call this morning to talk them off of the rooftop into the Father heart of God. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much this morning. You've been a great group. Enjoyed it tremendously, as I do every week. Feeling a little under the weather today, so you may not want to get real close to me, okay? Hit me kind of on Friday evening, and so it's been stomach and everything. So just bear that in mind. Yeah, bear that in mind, okay? You guys have a great day. We love you.